April 11, 1970, Apollo 13 launched from Kennedy Space Center, carrying 3 astronauts toward the moon. It was NASA's third lunar landing mission. The launch was flawless. The journey began perfectly. America had already landed on the moon twice. Apollo 13 seemed routine, just another mission in humanity's conquest of space. 55 hours into the flight, 200,000 miles from Earth, an oxygen tank exploded. The spacecraft was crippled. The moon landing was aborted. The mission became a desperate fight for survival. 3 men trapped in a dying spacecraft with only one chance to make it home alive. This is the story of that mission, as witnessed by Mission Control Flight Controller Eugene Kranz and the 3 astronauts who lived those 87 hours wondering if they would ever see Earth again. The crew commander, James Lovell, was on his 4th space mission. He had flown to the moon once before on Apollo 8. He was experienced, calm under pressure, the perfect commander. At 42 years old, he was one of NASA's most respected astronauts. Command Module pilot Jack Swigert was making his first spaceflight. He had been added to the crew just 48 hours before launch, when the original pilot was exposed to German measles. Swigert was brilliant, capable, but this was his first time in space. Lunar Module pilot Fred Hayes was also on his first mission. He was supposed to walk on the moon. He had trained for years for this moment. Now he was 200,000 miles from Earth in a spacecraft that was falling apart. The flight, April 11th to 13th. The first 2 days of Apollo 13 went smoothly. The Saturn V rocket performed perfectly. The spacecraft separated from its booster and began the journey to the moon. The crew settled into their routine. They conducted television broadcasts showing life aboard the spacecraft. They joked and talked about the mission ahead. At Mission Control in Houston, Flight Director Eugene Kranz watched over the mission. Dozens of controllers monitored every system. Telemetry streamed back from the spacecraft. Everything looked normal. Apollo 13 was proceeding exactly as planned. On the evening of April the 13th, 55 hours and 54 minutes into the mission, Jack Swigert performed a routine procedure. He flipped switches to stir the oxygen tanks. The stirring kept the oxygen from settling and ensured accurate pressure readings. It was standard procedure. He had done it before. There was no reason to expect anything unusual. The explosion, 55, 54, 53, mission time. Jack Swigert flipped the switches. The fans inside Oxygen Tank 2 began stirring the super-cold liquid oxygen. 13 seconds later, the tank exploded. The blast ripped through the service module. It damaged Oxygen Tank 1. It knocked out 2 of the 3 fuel cells that provided electrical power and water to the command module. Systems began failing across the spacecraft. Warning lights lit up. Alarms sounded. The spacecraft shuddered from the explosion. Jim Lovell saw the instrument panel light up with warnings. He felt the spacecraft lurch. Something had gone catastrophically wrong. He keyed his radio. "Okay, Houston, we've had a problem here." At Mission Control, Jack Luzma was on the communications console. He responded, "This is Houston. Say again, please." Jim Lovell's voice came back, calm but urgent. "Houston, we've had a problem. We've had a main B bus undervolt." The electrical bus had lost power. That meant fuel cells were failing. That meant something very bad had happened. At Mission Control, controllers stared at their screens. Telemetry was showing impossible readings. Systems were failing faster than they could track them. Eugene Kranz stood up at his console, his voice cut through the rising tension. "Okay, let's everybody keep cool. Let's solve the problem, but let's not make it any worse by guessing." The realization. Within minutes, the crew and mission control understood the situation. An explosion in the service module had crippled the spacecraft. Oxygen was venting into space. The command module, called Odyssey, was dying. Its fuel cells required oxygen to generate power. Without oxygen, the fuel cells would fail. Without power, the command module couldn't function. Life support would fail. The spacecraft would become a tomb. Jim Lovell looked out his window and saw the problem. Gas was venting from the service module, a white cloud expanding into the blackness of space. They were losing their oxygen. They were losing their power. They were losing their spacecraft. "It looks to me," Lovell reported to Houston, "that we are venting something out into space." Fred Hayes checked the oxygen tank pressure. Tank 2 was reading 0. Tank 1 was dropping. "We're losing O2, he confirmed. At Mission Control, Eugene Kranz realized the truth. Apollo 13 couldn't land on the moon now. The question was whether the crew could make it home alive. They were 200,000 miles from Earth in a spacecraft that was dying, and they had one chance to save them. The lifeboat. The command module was dying, but attached to it was the Lunar Module, Aquarius. The LM was designed to land 2 astronauts on the moon. It had its own power supply, its own oxygen, its own life support systems. It was designed to keep 2 men alive for 2 days. It would have to keep 3 men alive for 4 days. "We're going to have to use the LM as a lifeboat," Kranz told his team. The plan was desperate but simple. The crew would shut down the command module to conserve its batteries. They would move into the Lunar Module and use its systems to stay alive. They would power back up the command module just before re-entry. If everything worked perfectly, they might survive. Jim Lovell and Fred Hayes moved into the Lunar Module. They powered up systems that weren't supposed to be used yet. Jack Swigert stayed in the command module as long as possible, copying down procedures from Mission Control, shutting down systems one by one. Odyssey was going into hibernation. It would sleep until they needed it for re-entry, if they made it to re-entry. The situation. Apollo 13 was now in a crippled spacecraft configuration. The service module was damaged and leaking. The command module was powered down. The crew was crowded into the Lunar Module, a spacecraft designed for 2 men, now holding 3. They were 200,000 miles from Earth and moving away. Their trajectory would take them around the moon and back toward Earth. But the damaged service module had changed their course slightly. They would miss Earth by thousands of miles. They would fly past the planet and drift into space forever. They needed to do a course correction burn, but they couldn't use the service module engine. It might be damaged, and firing it could tear the spacecraft apart. They would have to use the Lunar Module descent engine. An engine designed to land on the moon would have to adjust their trajectory for Earth return. And they would have to do it perfectly. One mistake, and they would miss Earth. There would be no second chance. The burn, 61 hours mission time. 5 hours after the explosion, Mission Control calculated a course correction. The numbers were uploaded to the spacecraft. Jim Lovell would have to pilot the burn manually. The computer guidance system wasn't accurate enough for this. He would have to aim the spacecraft using visual references and burn the engine for exactly 35 seconds. The Earth was in the window. Lovell used it as his reference point. He pitched the spacecraft to the correct angle. He armed the engine. Mission Control counted down. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, burn. Lovell pressed the button. The Lunar Module descent engine fired. For 35 seconds, the engine burned, gradually changing their velocity, slowly adjusting their trajectory. The crew felt the gentle push. In Mission Control, controllers watched the telemetry. The burn had to be perfect. The engine shut down. The spacecraft drifted in silence. Mission Control calculated the new trajectory. Everyone waited. If the burn had failed, the crew would miss Earth. There would be nothing anyone could do. The numbers came back. The burn was perfect. Apollo 13 was now on course to return to Earth. They would arrive in 3.5 days, if they could survive that long. Survival in Aquarius. The Lunar Module. Aquarius was not designed for this. It was supposed to support 2 astronauts for 2 days on the moon. Now it had to support 3 astronauts for 4 days in space. Every system was being pushed beyond its limits. Power was the first problem. The LM had limited batteries. To make them last, everything non-essential had to be shut down. Heaters were turned off. The cabin temperature began dropping. Within hours, it was near freezing. The crew wore multiple layers of clothing. They huddled together for warmth. Condensation formed on every surface. Water droplets floated in the zero gravity. The spacecraft became a cold, damp cave drifting through space. Water was rationed strictly. 6 ounces per person per day, barely enough to prevent dehydration. The crew was constantly thirsty. They couldn't wash. They couldn't prepare proper meals. They ate cold food from packages and tried not to think about the hot coffee waiting in Houston. Carbon dioxide was the deadliest problem. Humans exhale CO2. In a sealed spacecraft, the gas accumulates. Filters, called lithium hydroxide canisters, scrub CO2 from the air. But the Lunar Module's canisters were designed for 2 people for 2 days. With 3 people for 4 days, the canisters would be exhausted long before they reached Earth. The CO2 level would rise. The crew would become drowsy, then unconscious, then dead. The command module had plenty of canisters, but they were square. The Lunar Module canisters were round. Square pegs wouldn't fit in round holes. The crew would suffocate surrounded by the very equipment that could save them. Solving the impossible. At Mission Control, engineers were given an impossible task. "The people upstairs have handed us this one engineer said, dumping a box of materials on a table. "We need to find a way to put a square peg in a round hole." They had 4 hours. Using only materials available on the spacecraft, plastic bags, cardboard, duct tape, and hoses, they had to build an adapter that would connect square command module canisters to round Lunar Module receptacles. The engineers worked frantically. They built prototypes. They tested them. They refined the design. When they had something that worked, they radioed detailed instructions to the crew. Jack Swigert, Jim Lovell, and Fred Hayes floated in the freezing Lunar Module and followed the instructions. They assembled the makeshift adapter using plastic from bags, cardboard from manuals, and gray duct tape. It looked ridiculous, a contraption of tape and bags that would never pass any engineering inspection. They attached it to the Lunar Module's air system. They activated the command module canisters. Air began flowing through the adapter. The CO2 scrubbers were working. The carbon dioxide level began dropping. The crew would not suffocate. They had solved one problem, but many more remained. The cold. As the mission continued, the temperature in the lunar module dropped to 38 degrees Fahrenheit, just above freezing. The crew wore every piece of clothing they had. They couldn't sleep. The cold kept them awake. Condensation covered every surface. Water droplets floated everywhere. The spacecraft was damp, freezing, and miserable. Fred Haise developed a fever. He was shivering constantly. A urinary tract infection was making him sick, but there was nothing anyone could do. He had to endure. They all had to endure. Jim Lovell tried to sleep, but couldn't. Jack Swigert floated in exhaustion. They had been awake for days. They were cold, thirsty, sick, and scared. They were drifting through space in a dying spacecraft, hoping the calculations were correct, hoping they would reach Earth, hoping they would survive. The return. 3 days after the explosion, Apollo 13 swung around the moon. They didn't land. They didn't see the surface up close. They passed the far side in their crippled spacecraft and began the long journey home. One more course correction was needed, another precise burn using the Lunar Module engine. If they missed this burn, they would hit Earth's atmosphere at the wrong angle. Too steep, and they would burn up. Too shallow, and they would skip off the atmosphere into space. The margin for error was almost zero. Jim Lovell piloted the burn using Earth in his window as a reference. The engine fired. The course was corrected. They were on target for re-entry. Now they just had to wait, drift through space for 3 more days, survive the cold and the thirst and the fear, and hope their spacecraft would hold together. Re-entry day, April 17. On April 17th, 4 days after the explosion, Apollo 13 approached Earth. The crew had survived. They had made it home. But the most dangerous part of the mission remained. They had to power up the command module. Systems that had been shut down for days had to be restarted in the cold, with limited power. If the command module didn't restart, they couldn't survive re-entry. They would burn up in the atmosphere. Jack Swigert floated back into the command module. Condensation covered every surface. Water had gotten into electrical systems. He began the restart procedures, flipping switches, checking systems, praying everything would work. At mission control, controllers held their breath. If the command module was dead, the crew was dead. There was nothing anyone could do but wait. Slowly, systems came online. Batteries were good. Guidance system worked. Life support activated. Odyssey was alive. The command module would function. The crew prepared for separation. They would jettison the service module first to see the damage. Then they would jettison the lunar module, their lifeboat that had kept them alive. Finally, they would enter Earth's atmosphere in the command module alone. The damage revealed. When they jettisoned the service module, the crew finally saw the explosion damage. An entire panel was blown off. Wires and debris hung in space. One of the oxygen tanks was completely destroyed. It was a miracle the spacecraft had held together. It was a miracle they had survived. "There's one whole side of the spacecraft missing," Jim Lovell reported to Houston. The damage was catastrophic. If they had tried to use the service module engine, it would have torn the spacecraft apart. Every decision made by mission control had been correct. Every procedure had worked. The impossible had been achieved. They jettisoned Aquarius. The lunar module that had saved their lives drifted away into space. It would eventually burn up in Earth's atmosphere, but it had done its job. It had brought them home. Splashdown. Odyssey entered Earth's atmosphere at 25,000 miles per hour. The heat shield glowed white-hot. G-forces pressed the crew into their seats. For 4 minutes, they would be out of radio contact. The plasma surrounding the spacecraft would block all communications. Mission control could only wait. 4 minutes of silence, the longest 4 minutes in NASA history. If something went wrong during re-entry, no one would know until it was over. At 4 minutes and 30 seconds, radio contact should resume. Controllers waited. 5 minutes, 6 minutes. No signal. Had they lost the crew? Had they survived everything only to die in the final moments? Then a voice crackled through the static. "Okay, Joe." It was Jim Lovell. Mission control erupted in cheers. Apollo 13 was alive. The crew had made it. 3 parachutes deployed. The command module splashed down in the Pacific Ocean. Recovery helicopters were already airborne. The USS Iwo Jima was nearby. Within an hour, the crew was aboard the recovery ship. They were cold, exhausted, dehydrated, and sick. But they were alive. The aftermath. Apollo 13 was called a successful failure. The crew didn't land on the moon, but they came home alive from a situation that should have killed them. NASA analyzed what went wrong. An oxygen tank had been damaged before launch. Wiring had been exposed. When Jack Swigert stirred the tanks, a spark ignited the insulation. The tank exploded. A preventable accident that nearly killed 3 astronauts. Changes were made. Oxygen tanks were redesigned. An extra battery was added to the service module. Additional emergency procedures were developed. NASA learned, they improved, and they never lost another crew in space. Years later, Jim Lovell never flew in space again. Apollo 13 was his last mission. He retired from NASA and became a successful businessman. But Apollo 13 defined him. He wrote a book about the mission. It became a movie. He spoke about it for the rest of his life. Fred Haise never walked on the moon. He was supposed to command Apollo 19, but the mission was canceled. He became a space shuttle test pilot instead. But he always remembered Apollo 13, the mission where he almost died, the mission where everything went wrong and somehow went right. Jack Swigert was supposed to fly again, but he left NASA to enter politics. He was elected to Congress. He died of cancer in 1982 before he could take office. He was 51 years old. Eugene Kranz remained at NASA for decades. He directed missions through the space shuttle era. But Apollo 13 was his defining moment, when failure was not an option, when his team did the impossible, when they brought 3 men home alive against all odds. The lesson. Apollo 13 taught NASA that space is unforgiving, that perfection is required, that one mistake can be fatal. But it also showed what human ingenuity can achieve. When everything goes wrong, when death seems certain, when the impossible must be done. 3 men survived because thousands of people refused to give up. Engineers who solved problems that had no solution. controllers who worked for days without sleep, a crew that stayed calm in a dying spacecraft. Together, they turned disaster into triumph. Closing. This is the story of Apollo 13, of 3 astronauts who flew to the moon and almost didn't come back, of an explosion that crippled their spacecraft 200,000 miles from Earth, of 4 days in a freezing, dying machine drifting through the void, of impossible problems solved by brilliant people who refused to accept failure. Jim Lovell, Jack Swigert, and Fred Haise went to space expecting to walk on the moon. Instead, they fought for their lives in the cold darkness. They survived because of skill, courage, and the dedication of thousands of people working together to bring them home. Apollo 13 failed to land on the moon, but it succeeded in demonstrating humanity's greatest strengths: problem-solving under pressure, teamwork, determination, the refusal to give up even when everything seems lost. The mission ended with 3 men alive. That was the only success that mattered.